why did I do this? Why did I pack up all of this and then have to unpack and then pack again? It's just like, it's a little crazy, but I was just feeling overwhelmed.
Welcome back, guys. We are back.
We're back in Jersey, baby.
Yes. Crazy to think that we are 100% back in our house. And
right.
It's been a long, long journey to get here.
Amazing that we had to leave and do all of these things to appreciate what was right in front of us. But sometimes that's how life works. That's how the cookie crumbles, right?
Yeah, so if you don't know, quick little summary. We decided to move to France and got pregnant right before we left. And then we were there. We thought, Coco was like, I think I can do this. And then very quickly realized that it just wasn't going to work. We needed to be home. We needed to be with, you need to be with your doctors, and we need to be with family. And so we decided to pull the ripcord and come back home, and that was all part of our plan B. And so the whole loop from like sitting on this table and talking about how scared we were, and then doing all that, and then coming back has been what, 5.5 months?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, listen, I've spent my whole life trying to learn how to trust my gut and not just do the right thing or do what I'm supposed to do. You got to trust those gut feelings. And it was coming up that I just didn't feel safe and comfortable delivering in France. And that's okay, because this was all a test, right?
Yes.
It was all a test. And that's part of life. Like, you know, at first I was a little worried that this was going to be a failure, right? We were going to do 1 year in France was the goal. And if we didn't hit that goal, is it a failure or is it just part of the test?
Well, I mean, part of the whole thing was what we talked about with fear setting. And we said, okay, what if we get over there and we hate it? And we just, what's the worst case scenario? And so we played it out and we said, okay, the worst case scenario is, and your parents were so lovely and so kind. They told us before, they said, if you guys ever need to come back, this is, I think as parents, you fully understand what this would be like, just being like, at the same time, they're like, don't go. But if you do go and you need a place, like you can always stay with us. And so that was our plan B. And plan B was to come back, crash, land at their house, and then figure it out. And so our tenants who had a contract, they had a lease through basically September 1st to stay here in this house. And we just called them and we said, we're going to sound crazy, but would you be open to moving out early? And they were like, how early? And we told our situation and it was silent for a little bit. And we worked it out though. They were very kind. We worked it out. They were able to find a place. We basically said, hey, we're pregnant and we would love to be able to deliver our baby in our home if that's possible.
And luckily, you know, their parents, their grandparents, they get it. They have kids our age. And they said, yeah, I'd want to be home too if I was in that time of life. So they were really understanding. It was, I would say, best case scenario. And we were able to land on our feet in New Jersey and stayed at my parents' house for 2 whole months. And then just moved in yesterday. So we are still in the unpacking process. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There were times yesterday unpacking about 7 months pregnant that I was like, why did I do this? Why did I pack up all of this and then have to unpack and then pack again? It's just like, it's a little crazy, but I was just feeling overwhelmed and I did it, you know, one step at a time.
People are saying like, you guys are idiots. Like you should have known, right? Like, what do you say to those people?
Because, you know, hindsight's 2020 and people on YouTube and social media and such are getting a filtered view of us, having gone through so much. They're seeing you're from a different perspective.
Oh, people are like, you didn't know they don't speak English over there? Like, how American of you.
We didn't move back because they didn't speak English. Like, you're missing the point. Or maybe I'm not communicating it properly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we tried. And it just didn't work out. And that's okay. But that's part of life, right? You have this big hypothesis. You see it in science all the time. You test the hypothesis. Sometimes it doesn't work out the way you expect it to. Sometimes the hypothesis is disproven. And in this case, you know, I just kept wondering, is the grass greener in Europe? And we chose France out of there. And the answer was... in some ways.
Some ways.
Yeah.
Speaking of that,
it's not black or white.
Coming home, what things are you like because I have a few things, but like, what things are you like, you know what? They did it right over there. What are the few things that like come to mind?
I would say Europeans know food safety. And that's, food dyes that are not allowed, just the quality of food, the pesticides that are not allowed in food versus in the United States. That was something that was a big driving force for me. We buy organic and we do as much as we can in the United States, but to be able to go to the grocery store and know that red 40 is not going to be there, that feels good as a mom and just as a person who's health conscious.
It's an interesting thing because there's like the American way of like, let me do what I want and don't tell me what I can't do. And then the European way is like, we're going to put up some more guardrails because, hey, these things aren't really good for you in the food world. So it's funny because there's part of me that's like I want to have that freedom to do what I want. But as a parent, it was really nice to know when you're shopping, you don't have to constantly check and be like, are these horrible chemicals in here? Is this processed food? Is it GMO or whatever? Like, not to dive into all those if they're good or bad. But coming back, now it's like you see that and you go, oh, all those things that we kind of accepted as normal, you start to question more.
Now, I'm curious. You said guardrails. And that was coming up as the Europeans have more. But then on the contrast, when I think about like national parks or just adventures in the U.S., you see guardrails everywhere. And there's none in in Europe. Like actual guardrails. Like there's a lack of, and you're supposed to take responsibility. Like, yeah, don't go over. Versus I feel like I see way more management of the physical self in the United States.
It depends each country. Like when you say that, the first thing that comes to mind is like Switzerland. Like I'm not saying they don't have any guardrails or stuff, but in all of the countries, but it does feel a little bit of like you need to take some ownership and your responsibility.
Right.
And like, actually, I feel like there's a conversation we had years ago about like Swiss rules, and they take the stance of like, you should know. Like, you should have asked. Like, you're a responsible adult. If you break the rules, there's no claiming I didn't know. It's, hey, you're coming into our world. You need to know how to play by the rules that we put out there. So but answering your question about like American like guardrails, like one of the things that drives me nuts though is when you go to a national park and there's a popular lookout spot and after years, people got hurt, and it's like, we're going to put up guardrails, and it's like, that's not going to fix it. Like,
those darn influencers
people are going to step right over. Now you've just put up this horrible eyesight, so that's another issue.
But I was reflecting, obviously, that we've been in a point of reflection, a time of reflection. And I was rewatching the Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams this week. And at one point he stands on the desk and he asks the class, why am I up here? And they're like laughing at him, because they're like boys in school and like, oh, I'm nervous. And it's because the world looks different from different places. We need to force ourselves to get outside of our comfort zone, our four walls, our town. Even if it's just, an hour away, things are different. Why did we go to France? Because things look different there. Because we want to challenge ourselves. Because we want to look at the world differently. And we want our daughter to look at the world differently. And yes, maybe it didn't last a year. But we sure as heck learned a lot. I'll say that. And learned about ourselves, learned about where we want to be. And I'm proud of us.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, we went and lived in France for 3 months and had a blast. We went and traveled around, and we didn't integrate fully into the culture, but we did a lot. We did more than just dip our toes in. I mean, we were wading waist deep trying to swim a little bit.
We had our gym membership. We were good.
Yeah,
we were trying. And I have to think, looking back now that I'm not deathly ill, I was really sick for the first 2 months, and pregnant. And so I couldn't, I'm not going to a class to take French classes. I can't go anywhere. I'm basically in bed most of the time. And that was really hard.
It was tough.
Yeah.
Here we are in the first apartment was like a small 2-bedroom apartment. And Colette's like just laying in bed, trying to like survive while our nanny's taking care of Scotland in the morning. And I remember
Bless her.
day
She was amazing.
Like day 2 or 3, you like walked out like, like a little gremlin with like a blanket over you. And you're like, Heather, you're like, I'm pregnant. I'm not sick. And you felt bad. And
I
she's
had
like,
to
oh,
tell
okay.
her because it was so early on. I didn't want her to think I was like bringing her into a germ tube or something.
Yeah. That Robin Williams stance is very, and you can do that anywhere. I mean, you can get out of your town, even small stuff, like take a walk in a different way and just view stuff differently. It's very good to do.
Yeah.
Just to change things up.
If we knew it all, life would be quite boring, right? That's my stance on it. We have to, why do we travel? Because we want to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations. We want to see how people do things differently because there's no right or wrong, even though we get really stuck in our own way, right? I mean, a person in New Jersey is going to do things differently than a person in Indiana or California. And then you see that even further contrasted in a different country. Or you see it in parenthood, right? How judgmental people can be if you parent a different way, discipline a different way. And it's just like, well, let's learn about all of these other ways. Maybe one isn't right or wrong.
Yeah. It's been glad we did it. Glad we're home. And it's actually very cute to see like how much Scotland loves being home now. I mean,
really special.
you would think that a 2-year-old wouldn't really have as many ties. But like she was so excited to come back to New Jersey. Cute, funny story. She thought it was still warm here, even though it's winter time. She kept thinking
Because
like,
we left.
when we left, it was warm. So she's like, when we go home, it's going to be warm. And we're like, no, honey, like when we get back. And then also she kept saying, I want to go home to New Jersey, even though we're at Colette's parents who live in New Jersey. So we're like, sweetie, we are in New Jersey. And she's like, yeah, but I want to go to New Jersey. It's like, okay.
So cute. But yeah, she has her people, her friends, her family, and I can see, I mean, she's saying to me, I like New Jersey better. I like New Jersey better.
So yeah, so Scotland's opinion is I like New Jersey better than France. She'll tell us that.
But she's very vocal about it. But I mean, can you take me through your process of like what was going through your mind coming home and then in the moment versus now? Do you have a different viewpoint or has it adapted at all?
On what?
On just the whole experience. Like, was it, failure versus success? I know things aren't as black and white as that, but has your perspective changed
Since we left?
Because now we've been home for 2 months.
Has my perspective changed on the
2 months ago versus now?
No. Oh, I mean, the only thing that's changed is it solidified the belief of like we made the right call coming home. And I think, now, well, the one thing that's changed. So we've been in our house for one day, like basically 24 hours. And we're still we're not unpacked just yet. So I think my perspective is like seeing the house and seeing like being here. It's like, oh, wow. Like we really love our house. We love our neighborhood and it feels really good to be back. So I think when we first left, I think we knew it. It just solidified that. And it doesn't change like the experience that we had. If timing were perfect, like it would have been great if we probably could have spent like another few weeks in France. But, with my visa and everything, like we just had to come home. Did it change you?
Yes. I think having some time perspective definitely changed my view on what transpired. Kind of like coming home and assessing from a zoomed out view of things. When you're in it, it's really hard to have the perspective on it. But when you get up on the desk like Robin Williams and you see it from a different perspective, you go, okay, I'm so glad I trusted my gut. I'm so glad I did that. We have to try. I think about the alternative of the thought that went through my head when I found out I was pregnant and we were leaving for France. Oh, maybe we should stay. If I stayed, I would have always wondered, what if? Now I don't have to wonder what if.
Yeah, that would have been a huge... I'm glad we went because I know you. And if we would have stayed after finding out we're pregnant, you would have not stopped talking or planning or researching for years about moving to Europe. You would have just been like, we're going here. We're going to wait till baby boy's like, I don't know, like a year. Maybe we can go then and then we'll roll. And I'm so glad we don't have to do that. But I think going back to your original question, I don't think I changed my perspective too much. I hearing your response, I think it's because in my mind, when we made decisions, I move on. So like, I think you felt like maybe you felt regret or you felt like guilty or whatever for
Did
the
I make
decision.
the right choice?
Did you make the right choice? Whereas I can compartmentalize a lot of the decisions much more. Just so I was like, this is a decision. We're moving on. Like, that's it. And actually, a lot of when it comes to happiness, if you sit there and dwell on your decision, a lot of times it will basically divide your happiness amongst the two decisions that you're deciding on. And this can be from like deciding on who you're going to be with, or deciding on like what we're deciding right now, like what napkin holder we're going to put on our kitchen table, like little things. So if you just make a decision, hey, this is it. This is the color we're going to paint, our child's room, and then you move on, you'll be much happier than like thinking, oh, should I have done a different color of pink or different color of blue? So yeah, I think that's why I haven't really felt like it's been a different perspective.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So once you pick the wedding dress, don't keep browsing and
Don't
searching.
keep browsing. What was the best memory of going to France?
The best memory of going to France. I mean, croissants, like the freshness of the food come to mind.
Yeah, I guess what do you
keep
miss?
talking about
Yeah, what do you miss about France?
Can you tell I'm pregnant? I miss the price of things. Like some prices were lower, drastically lower, just like going to get a croissant, was €1 versus here, it's $4-ish at the boulangerie, the local boulangerie. That was lovely. And the freshness and just the quality of that pain au chocolat, the butteriness, the melting in your mouth. That was wonderful. That's what we're known for. I mean,
I miss the like walking, just going to get it. Like
we don't walk much.
Yeah. You're so isolated here. And we felt this way when we first moved here, is in a lot of American, suburban cultures. It's like you get in your car, you're in this bubble, you don't talk to anyone, you drive to the store or drive to pick your kids up from school and come home, and that's it. Right. And there's not this interaction. You don't accidentally find a new restaurant or a new boulangerie, or there's a park because the subway broke down, so we have to walk a different way.
Right.
So I do
You're
miss
seeing things at a quicker pace.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also miss the proximity to different places, hopping on a train and being somewhere so fabulous in just a couple of hours. Or, we did a road trip and we got to drive through Italy on our way to Switzerland. We stopped in Italy for lunch and had amazing pasta just off the highway. That was special. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to go over to explore all of the other places in Europe that are so easily accessible when you are based there versus the long travel days with kids going over to Europe and then exploring from there. So that was really nice.
I mean, we got to go to Moustier, which it would have been hard for us to plan a trip there coming from the States, because it's remote. There's so many other, I don't want to say like better places, but just like it, especially now, I don't know. It's just it's a nook. It's a little nook. And you have to be like a traveler to really want to go there.
Yeah.
It's not a place where, hey, it's my first or second trip to Europe. Where should I go? It's like, well, you're going to go to the big cities.
Right. Your Paris, your Berlin, etc.
Check those big boxes, where Moustier is like far down the list, but still an amazing place to go visit too.
I would say, I'm curious because Scott used to work in such a leadership role before starting Romaru and in the corporate leadership role. When you were working at the big Fortune 100 company, how did you assess taking a risk, say with, you were in a management position, so with people that were your employees or even people that were in upper management, how did you guys assess failure? And do you think it painted how you assess things now?
So there's actually some of it is kind of ingrained. Like, it's interesting how there's ways my mind thinks, the ways that my mind will think that I can't determine if it's like oh, this is just how I am. This is what I learned in school, or this is what I learned at work. It's just what it is. And one of those is, it's, if you're in the manufacturing world, you know all about it. It's just called like TPM. And this is a system. Don't want to bore you with it, but it's actually developed in Japan by an American, is the history, after like World War II. But basically all the companies, even like tech, uses a lot of the principles from it now. So when it comes to like addressing a failure, there's tools and systems and everything you use to address it. And there's, I mean, we could have a like 20 episode podcast to dive into all this stuff, but we don't need to. But basically, you know, some simple things are like, it's called a why. And you might be like, why did we have this failure? And then the first answer you come up with, like, isn't usually right. So you follow up like, why did that happen? And then you follow up, why did that happen? And then usually you get it down to like, the bolt failed. Why did the bolt fail? It wasn't replaced properly. Why wasn't it replaced properly? Oh, because maintenance didn't do it. Why didn't maintenance do it? It's like, well, they didn't have a system in place to check the bolts on a regular basis. Why not? It's like, because it was never created. So then like sometimes you get to the actual answer of, hey, this is going to create a solution that you won't, that will last a lot longer. Because if you just fix the bolt, well, then in 5 years down the road, it might break again. So things like that. So and you're saying, how did it address, like, what was the original question? Now I've gone.
Just how you learned about how to assess failure.
Yeah.
In that job or jobs, and how it has impacted you and the way you look at failures now.
I mean, it's interesting because I never see a lot of our stuff as like failures. I guess because we're in such an interesting world of like, we're working for ourselves, and it's not like things are failures. They just like don't always work, you know? So we might, like this podcast, it's a risk to come out and create it. You know, we create certain episodes, certain topics, and like some do well and some don't. And it's not like, oh, we failed on that. It's like, we can get better. Like, or I see mistakes, you know, like you look at the edits, you look at the lighting, you look at the sound or listen to the sound. And it's those things like where you're like, we can get better with that. So it's, when I was in the corporate world or in manufacturing, it's like there were true failures and like big issues and lots of money lost because it's like a lines down. And you have to look at that and analyze it. Whereas like us, we're just getting at bats. And it's like, okay, we didn't hit a grand slam. Why not? Like, let's go back to that. And it's never, so it's hard to use the word of failures because like, I think because we're just in it's a fun world because you're learning and you're just constantly learning. You're getting on stage and you're making mistakes. So it's never ever a failure. Because I think if you use the word failure, it'd be really hard to get up and do it every day. Like if you looked at, let's say, this episode and afterwards we're like, that was a failure. Like, how are we going to sit back down in this chair and do it again? Whereas it's like, but if you look at it, it's like, we did really well with these things and we also need to improve this stuff. Mm-hmm. Same thing with our trip to France, you know, our journey to France. Like, it wasn't a failure. But we learned a lot. Like, it was a fun journey and it was just a shift, a pivot. How could it have been a failure? I mean, it could have been a failure if we didn't have the right information about like visas and we were detained or not allowed to come back to Europe or all crazy things like that. And
would have been a story.
That would have been a story. Yeah, that might have been a failure. Or coming back and not having a place to live. Like, that could have been a failure. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, but I was reading all about failure because truth be told, I was looking at it for some time as a failure. I thought, okay, I need to dig into this and learn about it and figure out, why am I thinking this way? And so I found this great Harvard Business Review article about failure and how it was really looking about how corporations assess failure. And they talked about Duke University calls what we did an intelligent failure. So hear me out. This is when something occurs where experimentation is necessary. And it brought me back to that hypothesis thinking of, how are you ever going to know what it's like to live in Europe if you don't go live in Europe? You can go travel to Europe and stay there for 2 weeks and stay in this wonderful hotel and drink your Aperol spritzes and think it's all grand and hear about how healthcare costs, you know, next to nothing. I know you pay in your taxes. I get it. Or how, you know, like childcare is included at a lower age and so you'll save there. But what's it like to live there? what's the culture like as a local, not as a tourist? It is so different. So you have to move to France to find out what it's like to live there, or you have to move to the Netherlands or whatever it is to scratch that the grass is not greener on the other side, or maybe it is. Figure it out. And I know you have to give it time, right? And you have to go through those struggles. But we didn't have time on our side. We had this outlier situation. But I just thought, okay, this is what we had to do to figure out that answer, that personal calling that says like, you must go, you must figure it out. And people always say, but what if you fail? And we navigated what that was going to look like. We mapped that out. What if you fail, meaning at your test hypothesis?
And people are always, I think that's because that word's in people's mind and they're so afraid of it.
Why do you think people are afraid of failure?
I think it's, as a child, you hear of failures, or, I think it's you failed, like the first thing that comes to mind is like a test. Like you failed, you got an F. And like that's, as a kid, like that's the worst thing that could happen because you're a failure. Or you think of like the idea of a parent or someone telling a kid, you're a failure at this. Like, that just like,
that hurts my heart.
hurts. Like something like that. Just no wonder people be so afraid to try things because they tie that word to so much like doubt and anxiety when it's like, you should be comfortable to fail. And, it's like the idea, goes back to the phrase, like when you're on the mountain, it's like, if you're not falling, you're not trying hard enough when you're like snowboarding and stuff and skiing. And, when you're a kid, that should be it. Like if you're not falling, you're not trying hard enough in life and everything. As an adult, like you slow down with some of your risks financially and physically and whatnot, but it's like, you should be pushing yourself. You should be comfortable to make mistakes. And if you want to call them failures, go ahead. Like create a bucket of failures to like, to live off of. I feel like Goggins would have like a little thing of failures that he would wake up to every day, and you can use them to drive you as well, but don't let them define you. Because if you let them define you, then you are a failure. But to use them to motivate, to use them as fuel, gasoline, that's going to be much more powerful in a useful way to use your failures.
Well, I think you bring up so many great points when it comes to the topic of failure. And oftentimes we live in this binary world of like failure and success. And what does it mean? And, that comes up in movies all the time of like good versus evil, but there's all of these gray parts in between. And I like what you said of mistake, or like thinking of it as a trial and error, because that's what life's all about. And we almost have contrasting thinking, and where we say like, don't fail. I know parents, and we only want our children to succeed. I'm going to say it right now, and have the best, and work hard and all of that. But then we also say, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So it's almost like a mixed message that we're trying to decipher. And then it's hard in life when you're an adult, because there's so much more riding on you and riding on your decisions. But that's also like, life is failure at times. Like you have to go up to bat, and you have to strike out a few times.
Yeah, I think you have to have adversity. And I think too often, you think about like a path of a kid who's getting all A's, doing well, but like not actually being pushed or driven to slip up and make mistakes. And I think it's when you look at like flow state. Like flow state comes, I use snowboarding analogies because I love to snowboard, but it's a good one to understand, or surfing. When you are at the limit of your ability, like teetering between that line of, let's say you're at a speed down a hill in a terrain, and you're just above that, above your ability, and then you go right below it. And that's usually where you hit that flow state, where you get this like challenge of, oh my God, I'm out of control, or this is too intense, and then you come back into a little bit of, okay, I've got this again. And that's the same thing. If you can get that in life, like through your work or whatever challenges you have, like that will build the flow state. If you're trying to work on something where it's a mental challenge, you're trying to build something, and it's like, I know how to do 85% of it, but the 15% I'm not sure. That's going to excite you, because you're like, I can start to build this. Oh, I've hit a roadblock. All right, I can try these things, whatever it might be, or I can reach out. It could be reaching out to people. It could be using the tools that you have at hand, and then, let me test it. And if you can get that feedback loop, that's going to build more of the flow. It's difficult and as adults because we just don't have that the number of bats and the feedback loop. So it's hard to keep that motivation through like these long projects that might be like 6 months to a year long. So but also if you have fear right on your back of like, well, if I fail and I'm going to have a failure, then I'm not going to be motivated to work. If you've not had it before, if you haven't had that adversity to like, hey, I slipped up, I fell, I failed, but I got back up and I did it again.
What comes up for me when you're saying how fear is a part of this is there's a lot that is tied to identity here. What does it mean if I fail? Who am I if I fail? And you have to learn that you are the person that gets back up if you fall down. And that takes practice. This is like a muscle that you have to condition day after day by trying. And you don't have to move to France and have this grand test to work on this muscle. You can do it.
You mean uproot
doses.
Your entire life and your family and everything and move to another country?
Yes.
And then pack it all up again and then move back. And
there were probably hundreds of smaller tests before that.
Yeah. If you want to know what a failure like this looks like, it is packing your life back into duffels for the second time in 3 months and wondering why we did this. But it's okay. It's
trying to take your dog on an airplane again.
Oh, yeah. So what's the worst memory of France?
The worst memory of France.
Or of the trip. Doesn't have to be France.
I mean, I don't. I mean, I didn't enjoy finding an apartment dealing with certain people. That was a negative memory.
Yeah.
Just not feeling physically capable, like just because I was, had morning sickness, but all day sickness and all night sickness. That was really a challenge just mentally to not be able to be there for both of you like I normally am.
I think same, like I had a few thoughts came to mind. One is like when the cops tried to detain me because I filmed them. That was one. The when we were buying the apartment and just feeling like helpless.
Renting. Helpless is a good.
And so the same thing with when you had your appointments and like you were trying to talk to the doctor and make schedule appointments. Like I was feeling helpless too, because it's like, I don't speak the language. And those were the bad memories of like, usually one of us can, for example, that was like, you were trying to get a hold of the doctor. Like I could have helped like call as well and try to navigate the secretaries, and you were doing the best. You were doing everything you could, and you were speaking in French, and you just couldn't get through, basically. Yeah. So
that's what it felt like. I couldn't get through in multiple ways.
Let's all right. So all the people who are like, okay, I've made it through your failure discussion of like how big of a mistake it was. What are like tools and tips for people who are considering this? And I think I'm going to say the first one. First one is podcast that's coming out. If you are curious about legally, like what visa options you have, we have a full interview on the one before this with a French-American attorney who talks about all the options. Because if you do have any interest in spending time in France, you can do it. I mean, it's pretty much anyone could live abroad. That would be the first thing. And then are there any, like, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say definitely do a controlled test. I know if you're working, you might not have, in America, you might not have more than 2 weeks off. But try to spend as much time as possible in these areas that you're curious about. Talk to local people and stay in an apartment when you go. Don't stay in the hotel. Try to have as much of an authentic experience as possible. You can only do so much on these trips. I get it. It's just hard to create what it would be like to live somewhere if you're not actually living there. But you're doing what you can with the information that you're provided and can access. So it's really visiting, it's reading the books, it's reading the newspapers in that language if you can, trying, listening to podcasts. And I think if you have kids, seeing what the schooling would be like, talking to a few schools. You know, in our process, I reached out to a lot of the creches and also bilingual schools. The creche is the French preschool and nursery school, not preschool. And I also spoke to some bilingual schools, French and English, international schools, to see how they do things differently. Because this is going to be how your kids live their lives is going to be a huge part of how you live your life as well. So figuring out what that balance is going to be, and then also what type of people live there. And if there are other expats, I know you're trying to integrate into a different culture and not just go attached to other expats, but that's just what happens oftentimes because that's what you know, and you're attracted to these people that are the fish out of water with you. And there's something that happens with those people where it's almost like freshman year of college where you bond with them because you're having a similar, different experience. So it's, yeah, I would say these like controlled tests as much as possible. And it would be a great test is now you'd be in a community already, but doing a Boundless Life cohort. We had another podcast about that. So you can do this either 2-week cohort or 3-month cohort where you travel to a place around the world where they have a school. Say you go to Tuscany or
That
Bali.
would probably be like the safest,
It'd be a safe test.
It would be sanitized some because you don't have to fight your way into a community, but also the community that you're going to be in is going to be a artificial, meaning like you would go there and have all your friends who are doing the same thing, all the families, and it'd be a blast. But it's on our to-do list in the next few years, like 5 to 10 years, I guess. So, but it'd be hard to integrate outside of that.
Right.
So
you'd be in this little bubble probably.
But it would be a good way if you're like, hey, we're thinking of moving to France. I don't think they have it there, but let's just use that. And you go there and you would at least get to really see the culture. You'd learn a lot.
Yeah.
And then you could come home and say, all right, maybe let's try to figure out how we can do it full time.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's, there's multiple ways. And yeah, the thing is that living in a country is much different than vacationing in a country.
Yeah. And you know what? You have to have just an open mind and a lot of grit too, because you don't know what's going to happen. I can help you plan and prep as much as possible. And then when you get there, it's just different. It just is.
Yeah. It's been fun. I'm really glad. It's kind of like this, not that we have any tattoos. Like I feel like it's a tattoo I have now. And it's, what's funny is how simple like the ideas, like often we do this a lot. We'll have these big sweeping ideas of we're going to move to France or we're going to travel the world. And we digest it mentally, and then we kind of like just randomly tell people, like we'll tell family, oh yeah, we're going to move to France. And people, excuse me, what'd you say? Right? Like so many, I can remember being like on the playground with Scotland before we did this and just saying to our friends like, yeah, we're going to move to France. And they're like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean move to France? And we do that a lot where it's just like, yeah, we got these big things and we don't realize like how crazy the idea is until like you see the response from other people.
It's a crazy idea until it's proven, right?
Yeah.
And we all have these ideas, or at least you and I do. But I think everybody has dreams and ideas. They might look different. They might not be international. They might not be about travel even. But I know we all had these ideas as a kid. They exist in your mind and your body and your soul for a reason. They speak to you at different times of life. We learn to quiet them throughout different times of life. What if we started listening to that little inner kid voice again that said, hey, go take this risk, or I dreamt of this one day. Like, what happened to that? I think we bring out that childlike wonder in each other and we fuel it. You like say this crazy idea, and at first I get a little scared or like, I don't know, what does it mean?
Hey, let's go travel the U.S. in an Airstream.
Yeah, exactly. That's what came to mind. And then what is the little fan that fuels the fire? And then I like bring that out and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. That sounds crazy. Let's do it together. And I mean, I'm grateful and we're fortunate to have a cheerleader in each other that says, let's support each other and try this dream. But what is life about if you're not trying these things that make you light up inside? Why? Like, that's what it's all about. You feel alive and these moments, and maybe it doesn't work out as you thought it would, but better to live it than to always wonder what if.
Yeah. It's been, I mean, one thing I do take from this is I think your mother said it best, which was like,
did you hear that?
She said something like it removed the glitter of living in France, or it removed the shine. I forget how she said it.
Probably poetically.
It was poetically. It was, and it was like, yeah. It it's not as amazing. It's still amazing. I mean, the idea of living in France. Don't get us wrong. Like, if we weren't having a baby, I think we would have stayed there for the full year.
Yes,
we would have stayed. We would have figured things out and integrated a little more. But the baby was a big distraction, in a positive way. We're very excited. So, basically that's the future. Now we're here, we're settled, and just like anyone who's expecting a baby in the next few months, not a lot of travel coming up.
We're gonna be grounded pretty soon.
We're gonna be grounded, but it's good because gonna settle right into this house and be nice and cozy, and baby boy's gonna be nice and healthy.
And then we'll get the itch to go out and explore again with 2 kids, and we'll bring you along with us.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do, right?
All right. Next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram and TikTok. These are great free ways to support this podcast. Also, please subscribe to this podcast on both Spotify and Apple. On both of those platforms, you can leave us up to a 5-star review, which would help us out greatly. Please also check out the sponsors mentioned in today's episode. That's the best way to support this show. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please put those in the comment sections in YouTube. And yes, we do read all the comments.